It was the first time he'd seen his wife since she walked out on him and their 3 kids 4 months before. Will Dodds caught a glimpse of her, over on the mound where the monk's rubbish tip used to be. That was where most of the crowd stood, on that dew-damp green grass carpet speckled with the last of autumn's fresh fallen golden leaves. It was as if they were in a film projected onto a patched-up backcloth of dull, drab, time-worn, shabby, blank brick walls. The sort of scene in a painting by Lowry. There must have been a whole log's worth of little wooden matchstick people, all dressed in greys, browns, navy and black, with tiny random blobs of red. There they stood, motionless, as if waiting for a wind to blow them over, watching and waiting, trying to get the best view. He mightn't have noticed Claire and her mother if his eye hadn't been taken there by someone he knew. It was a little fat first aider scurrying across the gravel to scoop up another collapsed cadet. He was a foreman in one of Will's firm's many creditors. Will Dodds had few friends left. The death threats hadn't come with an expiry date. It was almost 11 o'clock on that still, chill, mortuary marble slab morning. The coughing crowd quietened, silent anticipation. The bell under the steeple of St. Botolph's, the 13th century parish church, mournfully, almost apologetically, slowly struck the hour. 11 chimes. 11 Big Ben-like boings that could be heard over 2 miles away behind the hill. Will counted them all as the sound bounced off nearby buildings, reverberating through the crowd like a microwave cooking sausages. Silence. Stillness. 1,000 thoughts surged through his mind, the flood of images and questions he had asked himself over and over again drifted into oblivion like spiralling wisps of cigarette smoke. Why had she just vanished, taking nothing with her? All she had left behind was a scrap of paper with a few terse words. He had known her for nearly 30 years. It could have been a note to the window cleaner, or a reminder to feed the dog. What sick reason had she got for walking out on their wedding anniversary? But that wasn't all.
Crack!
A single shot rang out. The crowd collectively gasped, flinched or ducked. Some shrieked. Heads swiveled instinctively to where it came from. Dogs barked. Panicking, squawking swans flapped and flew from the moat beneath him. From his rashly visible vantage point on the brow of the footbridge, Will tensed. He tried not to look. His forehead throbbed. Out of the corner of his eye he saw patches of red appearing on his shoulder and sleeve. He froze, his gut rumbling uncontrollably. His heart raced, waiting for the pain. Seconds passed as if in slow motion. To Will it seemed like hours. He felt no pain, because there wasn't any. Relieved, he smiled to himself. At least I can't be dead, he thought. For the first time in years he was glad to be alive. It wasn't blood on his coat at all, but stray petals carried on the wakening wind. The symbolic single gunshot salute had come from a rifleman 4 stories up on the carillon balcony of the restored bell tower at the other end of the once cloistered quadrangle. The old monastery tower was rebuilt long ago as a memorial to the local lads killed in the Great War. Up there, unseen people were shoveling bales of blood-red paper poppy petals over the ornate stone balusters. Their hope was that the slightest of breezes would float them down onto the heads of those below. The Royal British Legion's open-air Remembrance Sunday service was held there every year. The near perfectly kept lawns punctured the ruins of the medieval monastery of Grace Priors, from which Greyspires, one of Middle England's most historic market towns, took its name. It was the 9th of November 1997, just a few weeks after the death of Princess Diana. The early morning rose-blushed clouds had floated away to leave the pale blue sky clear for the ascending sun. It meandered across the tower's south face at an angle. In its reflected glow, it breathed life into the local crimson brick, like a guardsman's regimental tunic. On that side, the off-white Portland stone dressings around the arch windows shone like silver buttons where the sun caught them. It cast dark shadows below the sills at each level. The tower's overhanging Venetian balcony and time-green copper cupola could be seen from miles around. In that light, it looked splendidly awesome. Just the right day to look and sound its best. Even the tower seemed to be on parade. Looking up, high in the sky, above the carillon bells, Will noticed a sweeping diagonal white vapour trail behind the tiny shiny speck of an airliner in the sky 5 miles above. It was carrying travellers and revellers to lands far away. It was as if its ghostly white line was lazily ticking the box of approval of the unseen world below, oblivious to things perhaps being not what they were meant to be. Will smiled to himself. The irony was not lost on him. At least up there they have something to look forward to, more than most have got down here, he said to himself. By the end of the carillion's 47-bell cadenced clanging and clanking of Chopin's Death March, the fallen had been respectfully remembered. The last post and reveille sounded, the Lord's Prayer said, the homage and epitaph read, the red wreaths laid. Scouts and Girl Guides had had their coin-clinking collection buckets filled, and the last discordant mumbled, relieved it was nearly all over for another year, verse of O valiant hearts who to your glory came had faded away. Chilblains were becoming impatient. Breakfast seemed ages ago, their mission nearly complete. Impatient, fidgety, frost-fingered folks wanted their Sunday roast. Other things to do. Just visible through the near-naked trees, a chest full of medals, long-retired colonel type, complete with black Crombie overcoat, black Cossack-style woolly hat, waxed winged moustache and monocle, commandeered the microphone. His clipped, upper-class English precise announcement of the address tailed off, lost in the wake of an ambulance siren screeching round a nearby corner. Once again silence fell. Silent stillness for several seconds. The loudspeakers spluttered and whistled with their incoherent echoing message. Necks craned to see who was speaking. But whoever it was, they were lost among the half-hidden penguin-like huddle of local dignitaries in their ceremonial robes and late autumn finery at the foot of the tower. There was a different voice, the sort you can't help but listen to. It held all the muffled menace of far-off artillery fire, impossible to ignore for fear of what might be. It wasn't the mumbled matins message of a going-through-the-motions preacher. It had emotion. It spat a century's worth of Celtic bitterness. It might have been the rich guttural growl of Richard Burton as Winston Churchill, or any of the other great English-speaking voices. But it wasn't, quite. It wasn't so much the tone, it was what was said that skewered the emotions. It was to haunt Will for months and years to come. Although he didn't realize it at the time, it was telling him where he had come from, where he was now, and where he was going. "Who's supposed to be speaking?" wheezed one old codger, almost losing his Paris beret as he leaned across Will's chest to get a better view. "Dunno. It's not the proper one," puffed his veteran mate. "He couldn't come. Sick, they said. Sally Army or summat. Evangelical, perhaps." He shrugged. The voice boomed. "We gather here today, as we do every year, to honour and remember the fallen, the maimed, the injured, and all of those in the services who gave their lives in 2 world wars and many other conflicts besides. And so we should. It is our duty. We have done it throughout my lifetime, and that of my father and before that. But as well as them, my concern today is for another army, a modern civilian army, who have been through the same traumas, stresses and strains and heartaches as any of those in what we normally define as wartime. Historians tell us that every wartime has a cause and an effect. Occasions such as this mark the effect, because there are published figures of casualties. We have a focus on their numbers. Gravestones and memorials identify them. But we do have somewhere to lay wreaths. We are told that the causes of conflict, more often than not, are the result of a short-sighted misunderstanding of the information available to them by overconfident rulers of the day. Lions led by donkeys, they said, of the Great War. So it was, following a period of great uncertainty in 1989, that the seeds were sown that unbalanced the sensitive British economy and exacerbated the financial markets, whose knock-on effects led to the country's exit from the European exchange rate mechanism a few years later. Amongst the great and the good of the ruling classes, the bigwigs, the movers and shakers, the moneylenders and rich fat cats, the result was unprecedented panic on the scale of a major natural disaster, the consequences of which, in human terms, we are only just beginning to understand. I refer to those people, individuals and families, who have lost everything in recent years, lost one another, seen their families broken up, who have seen everything that they've worked or fought for lost as a result of a phony, invisible war, an economic war. That which we now call the recession continues to this day. Statisticians say, the like of which has never been known in my lifetime, nor in that of anyone who has fought in armed conflict. That includes the depression of the 1930s, before that, and since. For over 200 years, since the Industrial Revolution, this town and its workforce, many like it across the Midlands, have been the nation's driving force, with more dynamic small and medium-sized businesses than anywhere else. Now we are top of the league for bankruptcies and insolvencies. These are indeed troubled times. This is my generation's wartime. After the 1914-18 war, the Great War, to the shame and embarrassment of the politicians and the general public who had been kept in the dark, there was mass unemployment. The physically maimed sold matches on street corners. Today it is their ghosts who we must remember.
Today's too proud to ask for help match sellers are the psychologically and emotionally damaged who society must look out for. They bear no outward signs, no missing legs or a hook instead of a hand. You probably won't even recognize them. They still smile, some of the time, in public. Many are but a shell of their former selves, going through the motions of life. They have no cenotaph, no tomb of the unknown warrior, no village memorials. They have no special day, no comrades' organizations, no companionship, no visible medal, coloured ribbon or badge of belonging, no disability pension, no book of condolence, nowhere to grieve and regroup before they go on, nowhere to lay flowers. Unlike those who have mercifully survived armed conflict, they must do it alone. But they do have a second chance. They have hope, a distant light at the end of life's tunnel. I therefore ask you to remember today the mentally maimed and psychologically scarred of my generation and their loved ones, to keep in your thoughts their suffering and their heartache, as well as those who we must always remember because they had no second chance.
Stunned silence for what seemed like an eternity. But it must have been less than a minute. It wasn't a formal silence like before. It was the sound of people listening and thinking. No fidgeting, no coughing, nothing. Not even birds on the nearby ornamental lake. Quacking ceased. No traffic noise, no mumble of asides or conversation, no tittering, no fainting. Nothing. Just silence. The mass hypnosis of 3,000 people snapped. The electric tension evaporated as the crackly loudspeakers announced the final hymn. Praise my soul, the King of Heaven.
Well, that were a bit different, said the shorter para to his mate as the last chorus faded away. But he were right, though. Bloody politicians. Some things never change. Time to buy the lads a pint. That's the best way to remember them. They're opening in a minute. You come in? The taller one sensed the lure of the royal oak.
With the last Amen, from the balcony 3 buglers played the ever-moving sunset, the signal that it was all over for another year. People began to drift away. Will stayed on the footbridge. There was only one voice he wanted to hear, only one person he wanted to see, as a column of onlookers brushed past him. The mayor in his robes and chain, the mace-bearer and umpteen other worthies in their official finery, silently led the procession in the opposite direction through the large archway on their route to the saluting dais in the market square. With flags unfurled, the assorted groups and troops who were to follow manoeuvred into position, ready to move off for the march past. Then it came. From somewhere among the territorial army came the shrill command to move off. Each group leader transmitted the command to his own.
Company, attention! Right, turn! By the left, quick march!
Loud commands, voices, one after the other. Will listened intently. As the Salvation Army brass band launched themselves into its A Long Way to Tipperary, Will felt a lump in his throat. His eyes began to water. He was proud. It was the self-confident voice of his only son, his best friend. Jake Dodds was Company Sergeant Major, second in command of one of the country's largest combined cadet forces. A 17-year-old nearly man, taller than his dad and better looking, but unmistakably his son. What the local talent called a god. Will waited until they were through the arch. He turned and took the short cut across the green quad, through the remains of the rib-vaulted Augustinian cloisters, mostly destroyed in Henry VIII's purge of the Catholic Church. The few remaining tracery windows cast long, tree-like shadows from the low-in-the-sky sun. The king's cannons had failed to dislodge the structurally strong brick-vaulted roof. It remained to provide shelter for the town's medieval market, which relocated there for 200 years until the present market square was created in Georgian times. A Tudor gateway had been formed in the outer wall to provide easier access for the townsfolk to get to the nearby river crossing, and for those in the countryside around to take their goods to market. It allowed Will to take a shortcut. He entered what has since become a twisting, turning, narrow back passage, a brick-walled intestine, historically known as Whirligig. Apart from the odd gap or two, it had become a cold, damp, shadow-filled defile of decaying and defaced walls, where the sun was seldom seen, save for 6 weeks at the height of summer. In stories, it was just the sort of dimly lit place where dead bodies are discovered early in the morning. The sort of place you would not want your daughter to go through on her own, and certainly not after dark. Where the reverberating clickety-clack of footsteps echoed a minor key scale on the cobblestone xylophone pavement, a tap dancer's dream. To nocturnal piss artists, the winding upward slope was the world's longest urinal. The town's second oldest thoroughfare reeked of their efforts. Sniffing dogs didn't know their luck. 1,000 years of history and the previous night's throwaway. The last night of the town's annual funfair. Cans, broken bottles, labels various, drunk-trod dog-shit trails, chip trays and stale vomit, vermin-vandalized plastic bags, tipsy tarts thongs and dehydrated dobbers, candy floss sticks, burnt-out carcasses of bonfire night's last bangers, all in the 2 minutes that it took Will to briskly navigate the chicaned furlong from the monastery's apothecary through the alleyway below the Grade 1 listed black and white Tudor merchant's house, emerging into the light beside the sanitized delights of Boots the chemist's staff entrance. It was a manifestation of his personal hell. Will dreaded ending up as a penniless vagrant, a down and out amongst the stinking, spewing bins and cardboard boxes, home to drug addicts, meth drinkers, unfortunates, fools, and the resident rat population. A fag end in a gutter, waiting for a shower to rinse it away. The tabloids had carried vivid images of many like him, who had ended up under viaduct arches, sheltering beneath cardboard lids. It haunted him. Fate did not respect who you are, what you had done, or where you were going. Over the rooftops he could hear the muffled, mingled marching tunes of 3 bands and the shrill, barked commands of the officers. He knew that he was well ahead of them. The long procession took its slower, more formal, time-honoured route from Park Street, across into Station Street, left at Canal Street and right into the High Street, Market Street and the Square. About 30 yards and 2 turns before he got to the Square, Will paused at a special doorway. Behind it lay a staircase to the first. He smiled to himself, as in his mind the past waved to him, curtsied, smiled back, giggled mischievously, and without a word faded away into the memory file marked Forget-me-not, happy days in brackets. In the now pedestrianised Market Square, with its remaining late Renaissance facades above first floor level, Will stood at the foot of a group of grim gravestone grey Victorian Gothic banks with their gruesome gargoyles. His great-grandfather's firm had put them there. From 3 stories up, on a parapet, he felt the hideous hollowed-out eyes of the hook-beaked granite griffins glowering down on him, like hovering hawks spotting a mouse. Features that were all too familiar to him from his days there as an apprentice, when he had lost his balance while doing maintenance work and nearly fell to his death. In his recurring nightmares, their torturer's talons tried to tip him over the edge until he woke suddenly, sweating, exhausted, their images etched on his mind forever. Just past the dais, outside WH, where the big wheel and the Dodgems had been just a few hours before, Will rejoined the throng, still a large number, but mostly well-wrapped-up family members of those on parade. It was the year's first fashion parade of the previous year's winter wear, a kaleidoscope of clothing, old and new, best foot forward and it'll have to do. Scarves and gloves, overcoats, anoraks and hats, bobble hats, hats with flaps, hats with brims, hats with dangly bits, berries and caps. Everyone had a bright red poppy in their lapel, even the little ones, not sure what it was all about, but not wanting to be left out. The runny-nosed mayor and his retinue of officialdom, the lady mayoress wearing a hat from someone's long-ago wedding, the self-righteous and self-important members of the local establishment, the gowns and mortarboards of the university, members of the Funny Handshake Club, and anyone else who could get in on the act had taken up their places on and behind the saluting dais. The sound of the procession increased, which meant that they had passed the basin near the end of Canal Street and were turning into the High Street before the short stretch down into Market Street. As it turned into the square, losing the muffling effect of surrounding buildings, the sound erupted and grew louder and louder. 400 souls, a rainbow of uniforms and flags, faces of all ages, wave after wave, and still they came round the corner. Leading the crescendo, the Salvation Army band broke into Colonel Bogey, ahead of the gold, blue and red Royal British Legion standards, smart and proud, responding to the spontaneous applause. Trying to march in step were about 50 well-wrapped veterans led by a blind man, all with their different coloured regimental berets and rows of medals and ribbons. Among them all was Jeff, immaculately turned out, every inch a straight-backed soldier, although he could never have been one, proudly wearing his dad's medals on the other side, the first time that he had done it. Then came the green and gold standard of the Burma Star Association of Servicemen who fought in the Far East. Just one man and 3 widows, with their husbands' medals on their right breast side. Then a cheer, as a man on an invalid scooter with the biggest red poppy of the day on his handlebars faced the dais and somehow saluted with his prosthetic right arm. bringing up the rear of that group were the Royal Naval Association, the Wrens and the town's naval cadets. A respectful distance behind came the band of the Girls and Boys Brigade in their navy blue uniforms. Rat-a-tat-tat, rat-a-tat-tat went the testosterone drums. Tinkle, tinkle, coquettishly countered the ostrichen glockenspiels. Take no notice with the bugles and flutes. Leading them along, all on her own, apart from a lady minder a discreet distance away, was a diminutive, pretty blonde 10-year-old girl, proudly brimming with self-confidence. According to the local paper, Tom Darby's daughter was the one who found him in their barn that night in July. She was too young to understand why he did it. Today, in spite of it all, she had the look of someone who instinctively knew her lovely daddy was somewhere in the sky, watching and waving on the front row as she marched past. On her head she had a navy blue pillar-box cap with a poppy on it. Over her navy blue pullover and skirt hung a big red sash with a tassel to match her tie. She knew her daddy would have been proud of her. Her mummy had said so. She was carrying a drum major's staff with a big brass end. It was half as big again as she was. It must have been heavy for such thin arms. As for twirling it in the air and catching it, it would have been impossible. Ah, little duck, clucked a watching granny in the local dialect. Isn't she lovely? Mind you don't drop it, her friend murmured anxiously to herself, forgetting that kids of that age know no fear. Don't she look a picture, said another. Behind the brigade's band came the khaki and camouflage of the Territorial Army, the sky blue of the Royal Air Force Reservists and the town's Army and Air Force cadets. Then the police, firemen and ambulance service, St. John's Ambulance, Boys and Girls Brigade, Boy Scouts and Girl Guides, Cubs and Brownies. Bringing up the rear came the Grammar School's Combined Cadet Corps, the corps of drums ahead of their standard, the regimental sergeant major, Jake's pal Charlie, and then the naval cadets, followed by 100 combat camouflage members of B and C companies ahead of the Air Force cadets. Their metal-heeled boots clicked rhythmically on the granite setts in time with the drummers. Jake, in between the two companies, bellowed,
Lift, 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 right, lift.
Blanco belt, brass buckles and buttons, officer's cap and pointing stick, red sash, razor-sharp creases in his trousers and tunic, shiny black boots. Pity his school shoes weren't like that. But he was in the thick of it, as he always was. Wherever there was a scrum, there was Jake.
Eyes, right,
commanded Jake, as 150 marching heads switched instantly to his command as he saluted the mayor.
Eyes, front.
And that, Will's eyes watered proudly as he whispered to himself, is my son, my little boy grown up. Trying to hide his face, someone put their arm on his shoulder. It was old Orris, his dad's pal. Good, weren't he? Jake, I mean. His Gloucestershire gruff, scrumpy-rich voice wrapped itself around Will as it had done for years since Will's dad had died. Cheeky children had nicknamed him the Hedgehog with Specs because of his unruly beard and spiky hair. Little did they know that he was a walking encyclopedia of knowledge on almost everything. What are we going to call it then? He asked. With his mind elsewhere, Will was taken by surprise. Oh, the boat, you mean? Or the book? Not given it much thought. If you're going down the railway for one, I'll see you there when I've caught up with Jake. Will turned the corner. He froze as he nearly bumped into a van which he recognised, parked outside the Angel, a drinkers' pub where people he knew but wanted to avoid would be. He hurried into medieval Vine Street, the one-time ancient saltway and drover's path which was first adopted by the Romans as a river crossing. Once the town's main thoroughfare, it was now a narrow, one-way side street with double yellow lines. It was a secondary shopping zone, home to several estate agents, 2 firms of solicitors, an architect, a florist, charity shops, takeaways, barbers, bookie, sex shop, and a coin-operated laundry. On Sundays it was mostly deserted. Only cars and traders' vans coming uphill from the old river bridge could pass under the low railway viaduct arch. Will looked into estate agents' windows to see if the prices of houses would allow his mortgage to be cleared if the bank repossessed it. At the rented properties to see if he could afford a flat. He passed the architects who had worked on many of their buildings, then the solicitors who had acted for his family and business over many years. Gareth Baines owned it. After his father died, he had moved back into their big house on top of the hill. He had been one of Will's friends at school, but was always jealous because Will got the girls. He was the one that Claire had left him for. Perhaps both of them wanted revenge. For what? Will couldn't work out why. Baz the barber came next. He was a former young professional football player who had forced his way up from schoolboy level through to the reserve ranks. He had played for England under-21s. His world was shattered when he broke his leg in his debut match playing for Aston Villa's first team. With the insurance money, he had trained to become a hairdresser. As he had got older and found his place in the world, Baz had become the town's amateur philosopher and a keeper of everyone's secrets. He had told Will that although Will was very clever and a trier, he was not streetwise. To be successful these days, you have to be streetwise and never give in, he had said on more than one occasion. Next door was Blowjob, the sex shop whose sign, with its dangling J, had been sign-written as if deliberately orientated like a Greek god without a fig leaf. At the time, it had caused disquiet amongst the decent people of the town. This was Chloe's shop. It was no coincidence that she had taken over a run-down charity shop next to a men-only barber's. According to Baz, if anyone was streetwise, it was Chloe. She could spot potential. Once a hippie, she had drifted back to the town after the petals had faded on Flower Power. Before she went to art college in Antwerp to study sculpture and pottery, she had travelled the world. She was an enigma, hiding behind her blanked-out shop window and solid black door marked Private Shop. She did mail, predominantly mail, order on the early days of the Internet. She exported decorated ceramic cocks of all sizes, which she made herself. Since she opened up next door, Baz's "Something for the weekend, sir?" trade had all but dried up. She was stunning. Her father was Dutch and her mother came from Sumatra. Chloe also did tattooing, piercing, craft fairs, and sang at the town's folk club on a Thursday evening. Baz had the hots for Chloe. Some said she had the hots for him. But like the lovers in Undermilk Wood, they never seemed to get together through the party wall that divided them. The canal bank trees, with their limited life-left leaves, stoically waited for their last decapitating breeze to put it all into perspective. The dank decay of December was days away. It was to be the first Christmas that the Dodds would no longer be a family together. The first time in 30 years that Will had not spent Christmas with Claire. He wondered how the kids would cope. So far, they appeared to have taken it in their stride, on the outside at least. Originally built as a tavern for the navvies who dug the canal in 1773, the Railway Inn was rebuilt as a Victorian pub 100 years later, as trains superseded horse-drawn narrowboats. It had etched glass opaque windows, hardwood, leather, and fancy ironwork. Will had known it ever since his dad used to buy him a Vimto and a packet of crisps. In those days, children had to sit on a wooden bench in the off-licence. They were not allowed in the pub proper. The smoke room, as ever, was a communal ashtray, a fug of puffers. The public bar was the Sunday province of local fishermen, fresh from their weekly competition, squatting silently on the damp canal bank, contemplating worms and the mysteries of bait. The snug had a coal fire in the corner. There at the bar were Horace and Jeff, and some of the local anglers who had come in for a warm. Jake had got there before him. He was with his sisters. They had only gone to the service for their granny's sake. Afterwards, Claire had taken her mother to where she now called home. The girls gave their dad a hug. "Oh," said Sarah, "sorry, I forgot to tell you. Yesterday some chap called a bailiff called. Said he needed to speak to you." "The usual," smiled Angie, the well-upholstered landlady. "What's up, Will? You look like you've seen a ghost." Will was ashen-faced and silent. Sarah's innocent indiscretion had caused folk to turn and stare. "Cheer up, Dad," said Prue quietly, so the others would not hear. "Go and get yourself another woman. She's not worth it. What she's done to you, you don't deserve that. Why don't you try this new dating thing in the Daily Telegraph? We've discussed it, me and Sarah. We have brought you the Sunday one. It's on the page called Kindred Spirits. It's the same as the Thursday edition. You're a lovely man. You should not be on your own." Later that evening, with the kids out with friends and his dog snoozing on his rug, Will forced himself into the Conservative-supporting Sunday Telegraph. It was bemoaning the popularity of Labour's new Prime Minister, Tony Blair, following his response to the death of Princess Diana just 2 months before. The economic news was still depressing. The former Chancellor of the Exchequer, Norman Lamont's long lamented green shoots of economic recovery seemed to be under permafrost, without the will to grow. Will's team, Leicester City, under Martin O'Neill, were plodding away at mid-table in the Premier League. Outside his four walls, Will knew the vultures were gathering by the pile of unopened letters. His thoughts led him to what his girls had said. He turned to the page headed Kindred Spirits. The column where women were looking for a man gave brief details of who they were and a private box number. Never having come across such a thing before, Will decided to register and record a brief voice message. He forced himself to be jolly. The next morning, to take his mind off the ominous plain brown envelopes falling through his letterbox, he thought he might as well see what his initiative had produced. To his amazement,
He had 28 replies from all over the country, as if he hadn't got enough to think about. Will bent over and rubbed noses with his golden retriever Archie. "What do I do with this lot?" he asked, looking deep and lovingly into his companion's eyes, not expecting a reply. Will knew that look. Archie's mind was elsewhere, fixated on a white poodle down the road. That was a brilliant idea. Will smiled a rare smile. Archie hadn't uttered a word, because he couldn't, or bark for that matter, nor did he wag his tail or pick up something for Will to throw. "I know. I'll go for the voice I would most like to wake up to every morning. Now which one will that be?"